Japan's Science and Technology Ministry says the average radiation level 1 meter above ground within an 80-kilometer radius of the Fukushima Daiichi plant fell by more than 20% during the 7 months through June. Radiation levels were calculated using data collected both on the ground and in the air using a helicopter in June. The average radiation level at about 140,000 locations within an 80-kilometer radius of the plant fell by about 23% from early November of last year to June. The decrease was almost 10 percentage points higher than 14%, the amount attributed to natural decline. The ministry says that radioactive materials may have been washed away by rain and adds it will continue to carry out the survey as flight routes of the helicopters may have influenced the data collected.
Okay, John Collins was a guy pretty high up in the NRC structure, and this is what he had to say about off-site monitoring. Collins said, "My problem, the concern I have about aerial monitoring is that for the first 3 days, we were pretty much into a very static air condition. There was very little dispersion. When you're flying your helicopter and taking your aerial measurements, you're actually reading erroneous readings. I really doubt some of the measurements that were made. You know, if you watch a helicopter do a rescue, what happens? It's taking clean air from up above and blowing it down and pushing the water out. Well, the same thing was happening with the aerial surveys around TMI. The helicopter was taking clean air and blowing it down on the radiation detectors that hung below. I agree with Collins that whatever came off the helicopters is erroneous. Second is that the wind was very light, and this is important in a river valley site, and I think rolls into what Dr. Wynn will show. In a river valley site, in the morning, you get very, very static air. And the plume was meandering, but it wasn't traveling very fast, and that's a concern. More on Collins. Not only should we have good monitors, but also people who understand how to use them. That was a problem since day one. They get the data, and no one sits down and evaluates the data to try to understand what it means. This is the NRC talking about the data which was recorded off-site after the accident. And the last, and what probably the most important, is they had to chase the plume in a car. Now, as I was explaining, the plume variation from the center of the plume, 6 degrees off. If you missed the plume by 600 feet, you'd be measuring 1,000 or 10,000 times less radiation than was on the center line. So when you hear of a person being exposed and the metallic taste, or there's some air loss issues or something like that, and perhaps the neighbor wasn't, well, the reason was that the dispersion of the plume was very narrow. And you could easily have a factor of 10,000, according to a Dr. Vergeiner, who's the meteorologist on the job. When you look just 600 feet off at a mile, it would be about 1,200 feet off at 2 miles. But again, the further out you go, you just have to move a couple hundred feet off the center of the plume to have a dramatic difference in the amount of radiation you see. And on top of that, the NRC's estimate is, did I flick that just as you were taking that picture? Yeah. The NRC's, the time averaging of the dispersion can cause a 10-fold error. Being on the center line of the plume versus being off the plume by just a little bit can cause a 1,000. I put here, in fact, some of the data says a 10,000-fold error. And averaging the data changes it by about a factor of 3. The net effect is that the NRC's 10 million could be wrong 1,000-fold.
Continue to carry out the survey as flight routes of the helicopters may have influenced the data collected.
Japanese researchers are using an unmanned helicopter to measure radiation around the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. No detailed studies have been conducted so far, as aircraft aren't allowed to fly within 3 kilometers of the facility. The survey started in Futaba town, about 2 kilometers from the plant. The helicopter can cover a 1 kilometer square area in 2 hours. It can fly over mountains and forests which are difficult to access. The drone flies at an altitude of between 30 to 100 meters. So it has the advantage of accurately determining the locations of so-called radiation hotspots. Data is transmitted to a computer and plotted on a color-coded map showing radiation levels. The researchers plan to compile a report by the end of the month.
On the 1st of September, year 2012, Motomiya Clean Center, garbage incineration facility of Motomiya City, Fukushima Prefecture, Japan. Motomiya City is 50 kilometers from Fukushima Daiichi nuclear complex. Radiation counter map of Professor Yukio Hayakawa of Gunma University of Japan. Motomiya City is located orange colored upper middle contaminated zone. The monitor shows 0.65 microsievert per hour. This is a figure in air at my chest height. .44 microsievert per hour. On the 1st of September, year 2012, Fukuyama area of Koriyama City, Fukushima Prefecture, Japan. There is Koriyama City garbage incineration facility. Koriyama City is about 60 kilometers from Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Professor Yukio Hayakawa of Gunma University of Japan. Radiation pollution map of Fukushima Daiichi nuclear accident. This is government release hotspot map of Koriyama City. The monitor shows 0.73 microsievert per hour. This is a figure in air at my chest height. There is mud on the roadside. .19 microsievert per hour. On the 1st of September, year 2012, Abukuma Clean Center, Fukushima City Garbage Incineration Center. Located Watari area of Fukushima City. Fukushima City is located 50 kilometers apart from Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Fukushima City is orange colored area. Upper middle contaminated area. The monitor shows 1.12 microsievert per hour. This is the figure in air at my chest height. .18 microsievert per hour. Vegetables are planted by local family here. Eggplant, cucumber, and green onion.